2 words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Blair Athol or download the Revo Fitness app. RevoFitness.com.au or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.
We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
It's 2023 and we're on the father-son expedition of a lifetime. Aboard this small boat are Dr. Geoff Wilson and his 23-year-old son, Kit. They're on a carbon-neutral mission to show the world the effects of climate change. Geoff holds a record for the longest solo unsupported polar journey in history. He's no stranger to dangerous situations, but he's about to have one of the most stressful nights of his life. Having just made it through the treacherous Drake Passage with no issues, it's now 1 a.m. and pitch black. The boat careers into an iceberg field. They're hit with a severe blizzard. They can barely see anything. The snow and sleet completely impairing their field of vision. Geoff squints. He can see rocks and ice coming and disappearing back into view. He and Kit must think and act quickly. If they don't, the expedition and their lives could be over. I'm Ant Middleton, and this is Headgame. Today, life lessons from the world-class polar explorer, Dr. Geoff Wilson. Dr. Geoff Wilson, welcome to my podcast. You are quite the adventurer. Doctor as well. Is that a veterinary doctor?
Yeah. I could patch up a gunshot wound, but I might take your temperature a slightly different way to what you're used to.
No, trust me, I'm probably used to that, being ex-military. But it's great to have you on my podcast, Geoff. You are an explorer extraordinaire. You've done the longest solo unsupported polar journey in human history, the first to summit Dome Argus, solo and unsupported, the fastest unsupported crossing of Greenland, south to north, the fastest solo unsupported crossing of Antarctica, the first to cross the Torres Strait by kiteboard, the first and only wind-assisted crossing of the Sahara Desert, and your latest one, the first wind-powered crossing of the Simpson Desert, Australia, solo supported. So when I read that, I was like, what's going on here? When did this excitement for adventure take place? Take me back to your childhood.
Yeah, I think it's just that explorer gene. You either have it or you don't. Some people don't care what's over the horizon, and other people are just wired to see how far they can push. And I think it was always a lifestyle. I was born in Africa during a pretty wild time in Uganda when Idi Amin, the dictator, was doing some wild stuff. So my old man was an adventurer before it was kind of labelled that way. And he packed a light aircraft with myself, my sister, and my mum and flew 42 days to emigrate to Australia in this light aircraft.
Oh, wow. How old were you then?
I would have been 5. My sister was 7. So, it was one of those sort of foundational adventures. I don't have a lot of memory from it, just kind of snippets. And it's one of those things where you don't know you're remembering or whether it's just fed in by photographs. But it kind of set the tone for my whole life, really. I've always done crazy stuff, which is why my poor wife gets judged, I think, a lot by her mates for, why do you let him do this stuff? And she's like, well...
I feel your pain, Geoff.
Oh no, I'm like, stop judging my wife. She's doing her best to keep me alive and sane. But I've lost more mates through stasis, depression, suicide than I have through avalanche, crevasse, or exposure. So I kind of feel like while my body will hold out, I'll keep pushing. I'm getting very close to the point where my recovery time in the tent at night is too slow. By the next morning, I'm not feeling, robust again. So you're degrading quite quickly in a polar environment. But I've probably got one or two more foundational journeys in me yet.
When you're 5, that's quite a life-changing moment, when you had to sort of up and go. But I love what you said about it being your first adventure, because as a kid, that could have been the complete opposite experience of, it's quite a traumatic sort of, we've got to go. Why are we traveling for so long? Why are we moving away from our home? But having that adventurous gene inside you and you seeing it as an adventure, and ultimately what kick-started this love and passion of yours, that's quite the mindset to have. Did you carry that on when you came to Australia, or was the change quite hard to get your head around, or did you just see everything as an adventure from a young kid?
Yeah, I think I've always been an optimist. So, if you look at the human spectrum, we've got people that are a bit, midline in the middle. You've got your pessimists on the left, optimists on the right. I've always been an optimist. So I think optimists see everything as an adventure, whether it's a dull day or an extreme adversity or just routine. It's always like bright sunshine, let's go. And I think that mindset is essential to survive in a polar environment. So, I kind of took that into my teens, and then the folks ended up back in Kenya in Africa for a while. I did adventures there, but I'd never done cold weather stuff. And it was kind of like a bit of an epiphany. The best way to describe this is probably to kind of explain the timeline. We were in Townsville till I was 9, and then back in Kenya till I was 11 or 12, and then in Indonesia from then on. So I started to learn Indonesian, and I was up and back from boarding school in Brisbane. And then years later, I met Sarah at vet school, and I'm still doing adventures in between, like disappearing for months at a time, jungle, mountain, wilderness, and then coming back, and managed to manage a relationship, get married, have a few kids. And then the tsunami of 2004, 2005 happens. And at that point, I would say it was the beige years, just focusing on creating a financial base, not really prioritizing family enough in hindsight. And then by one thing or another, I end up as a translator for Medicine du Monde on the front line in Banda Aceh with over 100,000 dead on the streets. You couldn't move without stepping into human carcasses, and there were dogs eating the dead, and a lot of images. I think obviously as a person who's been through war, you understand that the human brain can handle a lot, but there's a tipping point beyond which we go, and there's some permanent damage, and we don't often know. That doesn't give you a lot of warning when that's coming. So for me, I felt like I was handling it well, and then over 1,000 interviews, you're kind of taking the pain on, like a father would have a completely lacerated triceps, and he's saying to you in Indonesian how he did it. The doctor's then saying, how did he cut it? And I'm just saying it's a steel cut. So she's treating it for tetanus and antibiotics. But your heart's taken on the fact that he told you he was holding his 2-year-old, and a sheet of iron came out of the water and severed his arm, and he dropped her and never found her again. And, she got washed away. And that's kind of layer after layer getting onto your soul. And then I came home after that stint, having lost contact with a guy called Hallidan, who I had kind of let get through my Teflon armor. He was a young guy who'd been cut thousands of times, washed inland 5 kilometers from his village, and developed tetanus about 10 days after the tsunami. And I carried him out of this village, put him in a hospital. We got him some treatment. And then the next day went back to revisit him and was told that he had died. And I didn't believe it. I went through the morgues. I opened thousands of body bags trying to find him. Kind of got a bit manic, and then next day got lifted out by the Royal Australian Air Force Hercules back to Darwin and then back to Brisbane, and kind of fell apart over the next 3 months. Started drinking too much, playing video games till 2, 3 in the morning, and managing to get on with life. But my wife knew that I had taken a wrong turn.
Wow.
And so falling apart a little bit. She's a very, very wise woman and said, hey, you've taken a wrong turn up there. If you continue this, you're going to blow everything up. You blow a marriage up. The kids you're not a good dad at the moment. You need to go back and find Hallidan and then take the other path. And so, while I was sort of making my way back up there, I'm thinking the chances of finding this guy are next to nothing. But we'd done kind of a round of money collection from mates and friends down here to give to his family. But I never expected to find him. And I made my way towards a village called Lompu on the coast of Banda Aceh, one of the worst hit areas. And there was nothing in the village. Went inland and they had a little UNESCO built or Oxfam built refuge. Went in there and I saw his brother Abang, and Abang had fed him through a straw because his jaw was clenched for days before I found him. And I saw him and said, Abang is here's some funds for your family. And he looked at me and said, oh, what for? And I said, oh, for Hallidan. And he said, why don't you give it to Hallidan yourself? So at that point, I'm like, did Hallidan make it? And he said, yeah, come with me. So I followed him through this alleyway, and there around the corner was a mandi, which is like an Indonesian bath you're throwing over your top. And I could just see his back. I recognized all the scars. And when he turned around, he's like, oh, the mad Australian returns. And that connection point was really important in my sort of whole, if I look at the arc of my life, meeting him and realizing, holy crap. And he told me the story of the wave coming into his village. His wife was out by the washing line. He was inside. He ran out, had 2 daughters, and he grabbed the wife and the daughters and held their hand while this 60-foot wall of black water with buildings in it hit them. And he got carried 5 kilometers inland. He never saw the children or his wife again, never found their bodies. Under Muslim law, he took his brother's wife to be his because his brother was fishing on the beach and was killed immediately. And the amazing thing was I came home having kind of found myself again, but realized there was no point in me licking my wounds because what I'd been through was a fraction of what he'd been through, and he'd lost his family. I wasn't going to lose mine. So I think for me, that was the beginning of really seeing the human being as a bowling ball and understanding we need that balance. You need your personal dreams, which for me would be the exploration side. You need the family side in the middle, looking after your wife, your kids, your friends, and then business or work on the outside. If we're off whack in any of those areas, we end up with terrible bias that's unhealthy over a long term. And yeah, sure, there's seasons. Like I think the year before last, I was at sea for 5.5 months in the Southern Ocean, Antarctica, Patagonia. That year was out of balance and we paid for it. But I've managed to get back. And I think for someone with your history, there are periods where you're doing tours. If you're on a tour of duty, that bowling ball's out of whack, but you correct it when you come back. I think if you're aware of that, you do your best.
Yeah.
As long as the wheels don't come off.
Yeah, no, and that's why, just having listened to you there, the importance of your wife, and again, the importance of my wife. It takes a certain type of woman, doesn't it, to be with people like us. And I suppose patience is at the forefront of all of that, but just a greater understanding of who we are. Travel is such a good, it's so good for light bulb moments. Like you said, when you're out there, you have that light bulb moment because, you're away from the family, you're away from your comforts, and, these life experiences through travel are absolutely vital. How important from yourself, is getting out there and traveling? How many life lessons are out there if you're willing to, get up and get out?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, if I look at the drive behind travel, I meet a lot of people who don't really have a lot of purpose in life, and the travel can become very hollow, or the adventuring can become very hollow. And the number of times I've met weird and wonderful human beings in the wilderness, whether it be Alaska, Antarctica, Greenland, who are just running from something, I think that's the wrong way to explore. I really felt after the Halidon moment, I came home, we sold everything, bought a sailboat, and we spent the next 2 years at sea with the family. The kids were 6, 8, and 12 at the time. So it was a great time to reconnect. And I worked out in 2 years, I had 12 years worth of dad time, because the veterinary lifestyle and the explorer lifestyle are both very draining on dad and husband time. So realizing that I was catching up on that lost time, and we've never really gone back to the 9 to 5, 6 days a week grind again since that moment. And we ended up sailing all the way back to Aceh and finding Halidon for a third time, so my kids could meet him and he could meet me. And it was kind of amazing, because by the time we got back there, villages that had just been silent, because all the children were dead, basically. 2 years later, the first children were being born, and Halidon's brother's wife, who he married, was heavily pregnant and needed a cesarean while we were there, which we were able to help him pay for. So it was kind of like the rebirthing coming out of these ashes from 2 years prior, but we had sailed there under our own steam, and then we sailed all the way home, sold the boat, and it's kind of year on, year off now. So we're into an expedition year this year. Last year was a bit of a year off, and I head to the Arctic in about 6 weeks. So it's in real time, we're using the lessons that I've learned in the field, in terms of mental resilience, human purpose, forward momentum and drive. And I'm loving the combination of that coming back into the vet game, because our suicide rate is as high as you military blokes in the veterinary field, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know all too well. Again, like yourself, lost many friends due to PTSD, suicide and mental health issues. And it's sometimes when you think everything's okay, and then all of a sudden these individuals are no longer with us. We spoke about the traumatic sides of your adventures, the tsunami, and how you sort of overcame that situation. But let's get into the record for the longest solo unsupported polar journey. What made you, first and foremost, just that headspace, that head game, what made you think, do you know what? I'm going to do the longest unsupported polar journey. And what did your good wife say to you?
Yeah, well, I think she's a very, very patient woman. And to understand how patient she is, you kind of need to wind back to my first polar journey was 10 years before the longest journey. And at the time, I had a friend going through breast cancer. And one thing I clocked on to a long time ago is that if you're just doing an adventure for you, when the going gets really difficult, you're probably going to tap out earlier than if you're doing it for a cause greater than yourself. So partly selfishly, but partly for Katie Carlisle, who was suffering breast cancer at the time, and she's still fighting now. She's a little warrior, that one. But we ended up making a sled out of Sarah's boobs. So my wife's breast we molded. And there's some pretty disturbing online images of me dragging a set of tits across Antarctica. So I trained all over the planet, Japan, New Zealand, the Arctic, with these boobs. So I'm flying an aircraft with these Kevlar boobs. So it's basically a normal sled with a Kevlar top, which is a 28 times magnification of Sarah's boobs at the time. And anyway, the weirdest thing kind of happened with it in that, so many, they were just like a lamplight to people. They'd be like, "What are you doing?" And they'd come over and you're trying to explain. And I'll never forget, right up in the Arctic, so above a place called Iqaluit on a frozen ocean, I'm learning how to manage my breathing and, like below -40. I had a bit of a lung bleed. I was coughing up blood. And this skidoo comes over the horizon, and it's an Inuit guy out shooting seals. And he's come over and seen this bright pink guy in a jumpsuit with a bright pink set of boobs. And he's just gone, "What the hell is this white fella doing?" Pulls over, and he comes over and for some unknown reason goes to lick the nipple on the sled and gets his tongue stuck to the Kevlar. And we have to pull his head off. And there's a chunk of skin or tongue stuck on the sled. And I'm just sitting there going, this is one of the maddest adventures I've ever done. But fast forward 12 months, I'm in an aircraft, an Aleutian aircraft, a Russian transport. There was the same aircraft they used to drop their troops into the Afghan conflict when the Soviet Union and the Afghans were fighting. And it's got all the Russian Cyrillic script on the walls. And I'm sitting in there and I'm in my bright pink jumpsuit. I've got secondhand gear. I've got a boob sled next to me. And there's a Frenchman going for the same record. We were both attempting to be the third human ever to go from coast through the South Pole to coast. And two Norwegians had done it previously, Borjusland and I think a guy, Rune Geddes. Anyway, so I'm stepping to the plate. There's 10 guys in the aircraft and they create a betting syndicate and they're all betting for the Frenchman because he's sponsored by Bitcoin really early on in the days. He's got brand new gear, beautiful Pyrenex down suit, new skis. I look like, I'm a dad of 3. I was nearly 40 at the time. And they'd like 9 of them bet for the Frenchman, and one guy bet for me. And the reason he bet for me was that he came to me in the airport before we took off and said, "Listen, I know what you're doing. My best friend Lottie is fighting for her life in Cape Town Hospital with breast cancer, and I want you to blow this balloon up, say a prayer for her at the South Pole, and let it go." And anyway, I carried Lottie's balloon the whole way across the continent. And when I finished the journey as the third man to ever cross it, and 7 days ahead of the record, he rang me from Cape Town and said, "Hey, everybody bet for the Frenchman. Lottie died when you're at the South Pole." And he said, "Thank you so much for carrying Lottie." And I just remember saying to him, "Mate, I didn't carry Lottie. She carried me." And I think the biggest thing I've learned with these adventures is just as we have to teach our young ones in life, if they've got a grander purpose, then it's rocket fuel. And you'll always outperform the guy or the girl next to you that is just doing it for shits and giggles.
2 words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Blair Athol or download the Revo Fitness app. RevoFitness.com.au or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.
When you have got that fire, that drive, that purpose, and it's pulling you towards that adventure, then you're right. There's no stopping you, really, is there?
No, and on that journey, I survived the worst storm of my career. I rang Sarah during that storm saying, "I don't think I'm going to make it." And literally within 6 hours of the tent breaching and me dying of exposure, the storm started to abate. I survived a sled auto taking off with a kite attached, and was racing out of my grasp when I managed to get on top of it, and the strings cut themselves miraculously. I would have lost all my gear, all my transponders, sat phone. I just would have died of exposure. I survived, completely freezing my belly, had frostbite injuries, and was cutting flesh from my belly for weeks. I survived losing 2 weeks worth of food, and found a new way of traveling where I would just push for 16 to 18 hours a day, sleep for 4, push for another 16 to 8 hours, sleep for 8, and then repeat that cycle to finally get to the coast with one meal left, ate that meal and collapsed basically for a pickup in 3 days. So, it just was superhuman what I went through, because every time I felt like quitting, I could see Lottie's face in my mind. I could see the women at Alamander Hospital on the Gold Coast that I'd met before I left, all going through their chemo, and kind of realizing they didn't have a tap out. So, even when the Americans were calling me saying, listen, you have to give up. We've seen images of your belly. You're losing too much protein. You need to allow us to send you an aircraft vehicle. And I just said, listen, you can send a vehicle, but I'm not getting in it. I'm going to cross this continent. I'll pick me up at the end.
Wow. And those moments that you say that you almost don't make it, you almost lose your own life, and in that moment, nothing else really matters apart from, if I take a step to the left, I'm going to live. If I take a step to the right, I'm not going to make it. Was that part of your, of your sort of reasoning to keep on doing these extreme adventures?
Yeah, I think the problem I had, was just being a bit dumb and pig-headed in the early adventures. So, your near-death experiences are just coming back to back to back to back. And then as I get more proficient, the near-death experiences are better spaced. And I think now I kind of see them as, if I'm having a near-death experience, I've made a mistake, or I've not imagined the dominoes falling around me well enough. So I think one of my great skills has always been, if I'm trying to beat a record or emulate a previous explorer, I'll read thousands of diaries and blog entries or journal entries from, say, for the first journey for 100 years of polar exploration. What had they done well? What had they done poorly? And then I'll try and improve on that. But then for every way that I could die, I try and imagine a bunch of scenarios so that when it's happening, my reaction times are shorter. And generally with kites, it's a kite getting out of control. Like, you'll either break your spine or break your neck because you get a death whip, or you're kiting into a crevasse and using the kite to get you out of it, or you've kited off a cliff and there's not much going on, or the sled's pulled you backwards into a crevasse. So, you can imagine all the ways. And the thing is, no matter how much planning you put into it, there seems to be always one NDE, I called them, that creeps up on you, the near-death experience that just jumps up. And, for example, we had a grizzly bear try and kill us in Alaska. My son and I were on an adventure that was designed to keep him away from schoolies, one of the most dangerous environments on earth. And and here we are. My wife's like, okay, yeah, great. You got him away from schoolies, but you nearly got him eaten by a bloody grizzly. That grizzly came out of nowhere. We could never have imagined, the violence of that animal. And
so talk me through that moment. So where are you, and how old was your son at the time?
So he was 17, so it's 2017, and I said to him, listen, if you design an adventure that we can afford to put on, and if it gets you away from schoolies, I've got 3 weeks, let's do it. So he wanted to cross the Brooks Range in Alaska. So we crossed it, got airlifted in, and then had these inflatable kayaks that we used as sleds or into the rivers when the rivers were okay. But we got there in the middle of one of the biggest melts at the end of the winter that they'd ever had. So the rivers were just out of control. So we had to drag these sleds for about 90 kilometres, and there were grizzly prints everywhere as we dropped into the lowlands. And then about 10 days into the journey, we came around the corner on the river, and there was a grizzly on the bank. And he looked pretty relaxed. He was sitting there like a big brown rabbit, eating berries. But then when he saw us, I'm holding position, and we've been told with grizzlies to never increase the distance to them because that'll invite a charge. So hold your distance. So we're holding against the current, and he's probably 100 meters off the bank. Then he stands up, and I'm like, holy shit, that thing is big. Like, he's 9 foot, probably 400 kilos of bear. And then he just charges. There's no kind of reason, or I can't see that we were in his territory. We were in the river. He was on the bank. Anyway, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, he's not going to swim. It's going to be too much for him. We'll just hold our position. In the time that he took to get to the water's edge, I hadn't been able to get the Velcro on my chest patch open. I had a flare gun. I was just going to shoot him in the chest with a flare, but he hit us so fast and didn't even stop at the water's edge. He just kept running and pretty much aquaplaned for about 3 body lengths on the top of the water, and then was on me literally a kayak's length away. And then this miracle happened that anybody with, a lot of experience up there is like a mock charge is a bear just presenting itself. Mm-hmm. Because calories are so valuable to them. Once they've committed to a full charge, they're going to kill. So he had covered a lot of ground. He was fully committed, and there was no reason why I hadn't, just ended up in his mouth or punching him in the neck trying to survive. But he stopped as though, a bit like a Labrador running into the patio glass window. It was like he hit this window, and then all this hot breath with like a tunery smell with berries mixed in it hit me in the face, and I could just smell bear, and my heart rate was about 260, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? So I just lifted my paddle, expecting him to keep coming, and the current took me, and he kind of let all his air out and then walked back to the bank and followed us around the corner, and then just sat and watched. And I still to this day don't really know what happened, but I know back on the Gold Coast, this beautiful woman who's always been what I call the prayer warrior for me woke up and just had this unction that I was going to die, and got on her knees. And there was some sort of supernatural thing that bear hit. And I think part of me is like, the number of times that's happened, it's too much of a miracle, to be a figment of my imagination. But I'm also aware I don't want to lay out the fleece or test it too many times. So I kind of feel like I've, if you're playing Call of Duty or a video game and your bar is just at the very red end, one more hit, I feel like I feel like I'm right at that point. So my adventures now have to be so well planned and thought out. And, we've had Project Zero is the project that we're involved in at the moment, which is just exploring how do we explore carbon neutral. So projectzero.earth is the website. And on that, we've done 4 journeys. We've sailed from Australia to Antarctica. We've crossed the Patagonian ice cap. We've crossed the Antarctic Peninsula, and just come home at the end of last year from crossing Iceland and climbing one of the glaciers there on horseback. But we've got 2 more journeys in that, and I'm really aware that I have, had enough bullets wing me very close to be super cautious now. And in my head, I have this image, what I call a faith eye image, of Sarah and I in rocking chairs at 80, and Sarah's got two rocking chairs tattooed on her forearm, just to remind me, before and during and after every adventure, to see that image. And it's almost like when things are going horribly wrong, that image is getting crackly and static is in it. And then you're fighting really hard to get the dominoes back upright and make sure you get home. So whilst there's definitely an adrenaline rush with the near-death experiences, I'm trying to limit them, and I don't want to do too many more.
2 words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Blair Athol or download the Revo Fitness app. RevoFitness.com.au or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.
There is a spiritual side, definitely, to traveling, and I think you gain that when you travel. You're almost letting the world, play out in front of you, and you're just right. Listen, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think people will struggle to understand why, when you've had multiple NDEs, why you would go back in there. And I think it's just, I think in day-to-day life, people don't realize that they've probably had a very close near-death experience. If they've left an intersection milliseconds before a truck goes through a red light, or you mightn't understand when you've been preserved from something. So there's definitely more at stake. And I think with an adventurous lifestyle, you're kind of increasing the odds of a violent death or a difficult death by misadventure or exposure. But theory being, if you've prepared well, dreaming big, you should be able to manage that. And I think for me, that's the challenge now. The better prepared I am, the less near-death experiences I'm having on the journey, the more I'm seeing treachery ahead of time. But it doesn't matter how well you prepare. On this last journey, the Project Zero one, we were 1,000 kilometers off the Antarctic coast. The nearest help was probably, I think we worked out, 12 days sail away. There was a tanker to the north of us, and then the ocean just crapped itself. We had 20-meter seas and 72-knot winds, and the boat was surfing on its side, sliding down waves at 16 knots. Like, it's just not designed to do that. And we were in danger of it capsizing or pitch poling. And I don't think, there's a solitude in Antarctica when you're solo, but at least the ground or the ice that you're on is stable. This was a solitude. It was myself, my son, a mate called Krusty, another mate, Geordie, on the boat. And the 4 of us kind of got together in the cabin, and I just said, listen, the boat is at the extent of what she'll handle. She may break up, or we may pitch pole in the next few hours if everyone just does the job that they've been assigned to the best of their ability. We'll have a chance to make it through this. And those 1 Kiwi, 3 Aussies, I couldn't be more proud of. We just kind of held each other, and there was no fear, no crying, no hysteria. There was just this real calm of, okay, everyone do their job. And if we do die in this storm, then, at least everyone's done everything to the best of their ability. And over the next 3 days, we just fought to keep that boat alive. And, we planned to the nth degree to avoid that exact situation. And what saved us was putting a drogue out, which is 300 meters of line with little parachutes along it. And I was able to slow the boat down to about 2.2 knots and then stop it catapulting forward. And the whole motion slowed down. The load on the rig diminished, and we managed to survive the storm. But it was just another reminder, listen, if you're going to put yourself in harm's way, it doesn't matter how well you plan, you're going to have some near-death experiences. And I think, like you, a normal person wouldn't do what you do. A normal person wouldn't do what I do. But society does need the outliers like us to encourage them to move. If they only come off the sofa and go back to the sofa, then my job is done. Your job is done. if we're talking about human resilience, determination, grit, the military environment is a very rapid way of showcasing the best and the worst of the human spirit and grit. But the polar environment is a very gradual thing. It just seeps in, and it's a brutal environment because every day is so uncomfortable, and it just goes on and on and on. And when you're using kites in it, you've got the problem of wind chill. So the air temp might be minus 25, but when you're kiting upwind, you're dealing with temperatures that human flesh can't handle.
Why do you use a kite?
For me, I've always been fascinated with wind. So whether it's kite surfing, sailing, buggying, I mean, right now I've covered more of the planet using kite traction. So a kite connected to skis, board, buggy, covered more ice, desert, ocean than any human alive. Dixie Danzakura was one of my heroes, a Belgian explorer who probably had high mileage, but he died 2 years ago in Greenland, made a mistake and stepped into a crevasse. So he was one of the greats. And then with him passing, there's probably a couple of guys who are close. But the joy for me with kite traction is you're covering ground that you couldn't get to. It's too far for an aircraft to get to. It's too cold for you to get there on foot and get back. You can't carry enough food weight. So with a kite, I can drag 200 kilos, and my range increases to about 6,000 kilometers. When you're just on foot, your polar range is, for a really tough human being, it's about 1,100 kilometers. So previous to this journey, the Australian record for a solo was 1,100 kilometers, and then I reset that in 2013, and then again in 2020. So,
of course you did, Geoff. Of course you did. Listen, you are the polar man. That's without a shadow of a doubt. And having done multiple decades in the polar experience, how much has it changed?
It is changing, and that's what's a little bit scary, because at both ends of the planet, everything's amplified. So we're losing big chunks of that floating drift ice. There's arguments to say part of Antarctica is building up while other parts are degrading. But when you're on Antarctica at the end of the season, I remember waiting for an extraction. I had 10 days of foul weather at Novoliskaya Station, a Russian base on the Cape Town side of Antarctica. And, 2013, it was just solid pack ice. You could land an aircraft right through into the end of February. Now, if you're not out of there early Feb, you're not getting out because the whole runway's melting all the way down the hill. And it's terrifying. The Arctic is even more amplified, and there's so many effects there that we don't understand. The Arctic's almost like the battery of the planet, the thermocline, and there's so much energy trapped in that ice system. It's kind of terrifying to think, once the Northwest Passage is open and that ice is degrading much, much quicker, the effect on obviously the wildlife and human life is going to be pretty drastic. But, there's people who still bury their head in the sand, and I understand why they do that. But they need to come with me and see it firsthand. And that's kind of what Project Zero is about. It's not really about creating solutions as such. It's really just saying, as an adventure community, if we can carbon offset our impact, then we as lovers of the planet, lovers of these polar environments, we have to show people how to do it. So if somebody's climbing Everest and they've got an option of doing it with a company that's carbon offsetting and at least having zero impact, that's the one they should go with. It might cost you an extra 5, 6, 7, 8 grand, but we're showing with Project Zero that we can do all these extreme journeys, including our ins, outs, the plastic from our skis, our boots, our clothing. We can do it offset. So there's a very, very, at least neutral effect on the areas we're exploring. I think if you're burying your head and saying it's not happening, you need to get up to either end of the earth and just see it happening.
What is the effect that this will have on us eventually if we don't get our heads or pull our heads from the sand as such?
I mean, it's huge. Like in Antarctica, there's just subtle little things like the little Gen 2 penguin's a very tough little character, and he can live in a wider range of temperatures. So he's just dominating down there. He's like the Bronx gangster. He's just moved in and can handle it. The poor old the emperor penguins need to hold those eggs on the ice sheets for the whole gestation period. Those ice sheets are breaking down and the eggs are falling into the water. So they're multiple colonies have had 0 eggs hatch in the last couple of years. So, the species changing, the krill underneath, which underpins all of that incredible life in Antarctica. There's shifts in the numbers of krill because of the temperature changes. In the Arctic, it's more visible because obviously the polar bears feed on the fringe ice. That fringe ice is breaking up earlier and lasting a shorter period of time. So they're bears that are starving and going into towns where they've never seen them before, going through rubbish and having interactions with humans that gets them shot. So there's not a lot of great news, but at the same time, if we look at the whale situation off the Gold Coast here, when they finished whaling, there was less than, I might be exaggerating, but I think it was 300 whales or something ridiculously small passing this coastline. In the last 20 to 30 years, they're breeding to a point now where you can't swim out there without bumping into one. There's 30,000 whales pass here. And, that's just through people changing and a couple of brave people standing up against a lot of odds to protect that species. If we've got people protecting the polar bear now as the canary in the coal mine and really focusing on getting this carbon, even if we're completely wrong, we know that if carbon is in the air, it's guaranteed to increase temperature. And it's a good thing to protect the trees. We need more trees, get them in the ground, reverse the Amazon culling. Queensland's tree culling is as bad as the Amazon. So, we have no room to judge. But if trees are good for the planet, why don't we just do it? I think as a polar explorer now, the end of my career will be so driven on climate because that's really the underpinning of it. And, the mission now is to wake people up and get them to at least push for carbon neutral and then hopefully, becoming tree hugging hippies all over the planet.
Well, Geoff, this has been an awesome conversation, mate. I've never actually met anyone as adventurous as yourself, especially in the polar environment, mate. You obviously know your stuff. You're very passionate about what you do. I know you're going on a few more explorations and you say things are calming down. I don't think you'll ever calm down, Geoff. I think you'll always be out and about. And a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this conversation, out of this interview. I've got a lot out of it. And I wish you the best for the future. Now, final question for you. What is next for Dr. Geoff Wilson?
No, well, the next journey, we rejoin Nanook, the ice-capable vessel in Nova Scotia, and then sail from northern Canada under Greenland. We're actually going higher than where the Titanic sank right at the end of their winter. So it's going to be very icy, big chunks coming off, and then cross over to Northern Ireland, pick up my son in Northern Ireland, and then up through the Faroe Islands, Scotland, and then right up into the Arctic to an island called Svalbard. Svalbard has more polar bears. You think I've had enough for bears, but it has more polar bears per square metre than anywhere on Earth. And we're attempting the first Australian north to south crossing so drop off by boat, and then the boat will stand off as a search and rescue base. And then my son and I will kite and ski from north all the way down to the south to get picked up, trying not to become dinner for a big white bear.
Absolute pleasure to class myself as an adventurer under your umbrella, mate. Super proud. Listen, send my best to your son. Best of luck with your new adventure. And listen, hopefully our paths will cross.
Good on you. Thank you.
To find out more about Geoff, head to his website, drgeoffwilson.com. Thanks for joining me in this episode of Head Game. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a review. I'm Matt Middleton. See you again next time.
words, Revo Fitness. Here's a few more. Simple, 24/7, reformer Pilates, body scanners, massage chairs, squat racks, free weights, pin and plate loaded equipment, no lock-in contracts, no bullshit. All of that and more from just $9.69 a week. That's surprisingly affordable. Join now at Revo Fitness Blair Athol or download the Revo Fitness app. RevoFitness.com.au or find the Revo Fitness app in the App Store.